All right, so we are here to discuss Chiefs versus Bengals Week 17. Now, this game, in my opinion, has Game of the Year potential. The Bengals coming off probably one of the best offensive performances of the entire year. You have the Chiefs who started slow. Finally, their offense is just looking right. The team as a whole is looking right. So this game as a whole, both of these teams are playing their best football going into this game, and a game that, in my opinion, is a good possibility to be game of the year. This definitely, in my opinion, is game of the week. I mean, some people have the Cowboys and the Cardinals game as game of the week. Me personally, I think this is game of the week just because I think the talent. I mean, there's talent on all these games, but just for me, this game is just there's a possibility this is just going to be an offensive explosion, or in my opinion, the Chiefs are just going to beat down the Bengals. But that's just my opinion. But let's get into reviewing both of these teams. The Chiefs are coming in having won 8 games in a row after a slow 3-4 start. Obviously, Joe Burrow, massive game last week, 525 yards against the Ravens. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase could not be stopped last week. Now, for this game for the Chiefs, if we're Chiefs fans, we're also going to be a bit of a Bengals bandwagon for the week, kind of reminiscent of 2019, except for the Chiefs. They kind of control their own destiny at this point if they just win out. But if the Chiefs are able to defeat the Bengals this week and the Dolphins are able to defeat the Titans, the Chiefs will clinch the number 1 seed in the AFC this week, and they will be able to rest their starters in week 18. So let's just get into the Bengals side of this. They're coming in 9-6, and to be honest, the Bengals are a very up and down, hot and cold team. They really are. They've looked really good against the Ravens both times they played them. They played the Packers close. Yeah, they lost that game, but they still played the Packers close. If either team had a kicker that game, honestly, the Bengals could have won that one. And then they've blown out the Steelers. But then there's also a few games where they've looked not particularly well, not their best. The Jets game, the Bears game. They played the Browns earlier this season, didn't look particularly well, and then they only scored 15 points against the Broncos. So this team is very up and down, hot and cold when it comes to their offense. There's weeks where they look really good, or when they're playing the Ravens, Joe Burrow is throwing for nearly 1,000 yards just against that one opponent alone. So the Bengals, very hot and cold team, but their talent, I think, is just undeniable. I'm a Chiefs fan, obviously. I don't think that has to be mentioned. But there's just some teams, there's some guys, there's some players where it's just really easy to root for them for how good they are, how good of players they are. And the Bengals are one of them. Offensively, they are when they're on point, the Bengals are seriously one of the most fun offenses to watch in the NFL. They're explosive. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, those 3 guys' connections. Then you add CJ Uzomah, and then you add in Joe Mixon. Tyler Boyd, they have talent all over the place on their offense. It is seriously one of the most fun offenses to watch when they're on point. Now, their offensive line is kind of an issue because they have given up 47 sacks this season when we get into the Chiefs thing. That might be a problem for them. Offensively is just their protection of Joe Burrow. So that's definitely going to have to step up this week for the Bengals. But you look at T. Higgins last week, 12 receptions, 194 yards, 2 touchdowns. You had Jamar Chase, 7 receptions, 125 yards himself. Those 2 guys alone had career-level days last week, and it was very impressive, very fun to watch. Both of those receivers are over 1,000 yards, so you know those 2 guys are legit. You have Joe Mixon, a 1,000-yard rusher, who also can contribute in the pass game very well. He did that himself last week. I think he had over 100 scrimmage yards himself last week. So they're playing well. And then obviously you have Joe Burrow, he's going to be an elite quarterback. And I give it a couple more years, but he is slowly building into an elite quarterback. Now, we can't overreact to just one game of him throwing 525 yards. But at the same time, against the Ravens, he has completely destroyed the Ravens himself this year. Now, the Ravens are a very injured team like they were last week. But Joe Burrow, nearly 1,000 yards against one opponent. That's kind of impressive, especially when you play them twice. I think that's something you can't just take your eye off of and just throw it to the side. That's still very impressive. That's still something that's really hard to do in the NFL level. And he looked like last week he was just back at LSU, just slinging the ball all over the place. So that was fun. But as a whole in this season, he's a 4,000-yard passer, 30 touchdowns. So if he would have stayed healthy last year, it would have been kind of curious to see how he would have done last year. Now that he's healthy, we're kind of seeing what he can do. Get him a bit of a better offensive line. Who knows? This Bengals team may be a legit contender next year. Let's see how their offseason goes with drafting. and maybe bring in free agents on that offensive line. But I mean, just as a season as a whole, this is nothing to be disappointed for the Bengals. They were a dumpster fire of a team for the longest time. They were considered the younger brother of the Ravens and the Steelers, and now they've kind of overtaken them right now. The Ravens, they're beat up. You have the Steelers, they're beat up. So the Bengals as a whole, they're a very good football team. It's just their issue is they're very hot, they're very cold at times. Their inconsistency this season is really what's costing the Bengals to be, I think, in that elite level tier of football teams. And then their defense their defense isn't the worst. It's not the best. I wouldn't ride home with their defense. They do have some great players on it. Logan Wilson, Trey Hendrickson. I mean, Hendrickson's 5th in sacks this season, having 14 of them. That's nothing to throw to the side either. Logan Wilson, he's one of the best linebackers in the NFL. They get him back. There was a time earlier this season where he was just an interception machine. But they do give up 345 yards per game, 252 yards passing per game, which is the 4th worst in the NFL. So that's something that's a bit shaky for them. And then they give up 92 yards rushing per game, which is about just middle of the pack, middle of the road in the NFL this season. But the Bengals, I mean, when we look at the Bengals as a whole, their defense has definitely had really high moments at this point. So their defense isn't something that you want to push to the side. But the Bengals as a whole, their team is merely their offense and just how good their offense is. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, CJ Uzomah, Joe Mixon. Like, the fact that it's when you can list off a team's entire package of weapons, you know they're a good football team. Like, there's teams where they have one guy that just casual NFL fans or just even fans of the game itself can list off one person from them. The Bengals have so much talent that you can list off nearly every single one of their top offensive talent. So this offense is near elite level status. And so I think offensively, this is a very, very good football team. And I think they can give the Chiefs a bit of trouble. But if we're looking at the Chiefs in this game, the Chiefs are on fire. So as we mentioned, the Chiefs started 3-4, and now they've won 8 straight games. They look right. This Chiefs team looks honestly better than any Chiefs team since Mahomes got there. 2018, the defense was bad. 2019 was a slow and rough year. 2020, even their defense wasn't particularly well. The Chiefs kind of struggled to close out games last year. But now the Chiefs, and this is the best all-around Chiefs team that I think we've had in the Mahomes era. And I know they struggled early on in the season, but once they got things right, the defense clicked first, then the offense started clicking, and now everything has come to form with this football team. Because even last week, the Chiefs didn't have Kelsey. They played great, and they almost looked like they didn't miss him a bit last week. So this team, I think, it's fine. It's not broken. Once they hit their stride, this team, in my opinion, is nearly unstoppable. And I think you can attribute that a lot to the defense, too. They mauled the Steelers last week, forcing 3 turnovers, only gave up 10 points. Now, one of the turnovers that they got, the Steelers receiver Johnson just completely dropped the ball. And it was a beatdown last week. You had Charvarius Ward's sweet interception on the flea flicker. Their pass defense only gave up 159 yards passing. They were able to make that key 4th down stop in their territory, get the ball back to the offense. But defensively, it's going to be, I think, one of the toughest challenges that they've had the entire season. They're going to have to stop T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, Tyler Boyd, and CJ Uzomah. Those are huge names to try to defend all on one offense. But you do get Rashad Fenton back. Nick Bolton should be back in this game. The defense looks like it's fully healthy again. Tyrann Mathieu was injured in that Steelers game. He looks like he's fine. It looks like he'll be able to play that game. So that this game is going to be a true test of the secondary to see how elite it is. Because I think, honestly, we have Snead, Fenton, Ward, Thornhill, Mathieu. Those guys have been playing at an elite level for 2 months now. Like, this defense has been playing at an elite level for a while. I think this is a really good challenge for them. You have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, like we mentioned. Defending them is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a really fun challenge. So this defense, again, it's going to be a huge task. And so I'd like to see them limit those guys. Don't let them go over the top too much. Make them do everything underneath. And if they do decide to throw deep, just make sure everybody's in the right spot, because they have 2 guys that you forget about one of them. It's free sailing. It's a touchdown for the Bengals, because the Bengals, I think, lead the league in what they call explosive touchdowns or whatever the stat was at like a million of them. So this offense and this defense of the Chiefs is going to be a tough challenge. But I think it's a tough challenge, and I think these guys are up for it because, again, they're healthy again. But with all those explosive receivers that they have, they can't forget about Joe Mixon. He is a 1,000-yard rusher. And so the defense, they can't forget about him. That linebacking core, you have Nick Bolton, Willie Gay. Those two guys have speed out the wazoo, and they're physical. Honestly, two of the best tacklers on that team. And then you have Snead, who can always come in and make a great tackle too. So the Chiefs have some great tacklers on there who can make the game physical with a physical runner like Joe Mixon, who can get yards. So I think they can't forget about Mixon, but they also have to contain Chase and Higgins because those guys are very, very explosive, and their running back is very explosive. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, the Bengals do give up a lot of sacks. Burrow has been sacked 47 times, so this game is the exact kind of game where you want Chris Jones, Melvin Ingram, and Frank Clark to just feast on that team, and I think they can feast on them. Since they've gotten healthy, since the signing of Ingram, since moving Chris Jones back inside, I think this defense, that pass rush, has just excelled and stepped up in massive freaking ways, and I think that pass rush has helped that secondary immensely this season. But ever since this offensive line, or this defensive line, I should say, has gotten healthy for this Chiefs team, they have been wreaking havoc on the NFL. Last week, they were doing it to Big Ben. Like, Big Ben was slow, but it just felt like the Chiefs' defensive line was just making them feel even slower. And so I think if they can get pressure on Joe Burrow, who can admittedly make some spectacular plays, that dude feels like he can slip out of any sack whenever he wants to. That is something Burrow can do. But I think if those three guys, the defensive line as a whole, and then if they do send pressure, get pressure on Burrow, I think that's going to be a tough challenge for that Bengals offensive line to contain, because that offensive line giving up 47 sacks is definitely something that the Bengals have struggled with this season. And then if we look at the offensive side of the ball for the Chiefs, I mean, you look at the Bengals, fourth worst passing offense. I think that's exactly what the Chiefs want to go up against right now. I think they're fixed. If you want to consider them broken, fine. They just looked off. Receivers were dropping passes, balls were getting tipped. It looked like all the bad luck has finally gotten out of the Chiefs system, and they're finally playing great again. So I don't know if the Chiefs offense was broken or they were just off. But whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, this offense isn't broken. This offense is completely fine. They were without Kelsey last week, and they get him back this week. So that's going to be a huge game, especially because if you look at the stats from last week, Hill only had 2 receptions, 19 yards, but he was just getting back from COVID. You look at that, Kelsey out and Hill only having that, you're like, oh, the Chiefs are going to lose. No, every single person on that receiving core, and the running backs for that matter, everybody stepped up. Byron Pringle stepped up, 6 receptions, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Derek Gore, Darrell Williams both stepped up in the pass game and in the running game. You had Clyde, who had that beast of a touchdown last week against the Steelers. Again, he might be questionable in this game, but if he is questionable, Derek Gore and Darrell Williams have shown that they can run the football very, very efficiently, especially behind that offensive line, which should have Creed Humphrey in the Pro Bowl, who's honestly one of the best centers in the NFL this entire season. This offensive line, my biggest issue with this offensive line is honestly the right side tackle, because that seems to be the most inconsistent spot of this entire offensive line this season. Once Orlando Brown, I thought he struggled at times, but once Orlando Brown finally got things right, that from left to the right tackle, I think was fine. But the right tackle is definitely the biggest issue, in my opinion, on this offensive line. But even then, last week, Andrew Wiley went up against TJ Watt and still played great. So I think as a whole, this offensive line, great. And so they're able to run the football, honestly, better than they have since Kareem Hunt was gone. So this offensive line, great. And so even with Hill only getting 2 receptions, 19 yards, and Kelsey being out last week, the offense, everybody stepped up. Again, Pringle, 2 touchdowns, 75 yards, and 6 receptions. You had McCole Hardman, he was making some plays. You had Demarcus Robinson making some plays. You had literally everybody chimed in last week. I felt like there was another game earlier this season where it wasn't just one guy. Everybody was chiming in, and they did it again last week. And honestly, I think they can do it again this week because you're getting everybody back. Once Byron Pringle got some confidence, he kind of showed last week he can be a wide receiver too. He made some shifty moves last week. He was slipping out of tackles and everything else. So I think if Pringle can continue with that confidence, he may have a wide receiver 2 status in him. That'll help Hill out. That'll help Kelsey out. Then they have 3 receiving threats. And then you still have Hardman's speed that you can use. And you have Darrell Williams running the ball well. Derek Gore who can run the ball well. And if Clyde is out, you still have 2 guys that can run the football well. And then even if Clyde does play, you have Clyde who can run the football like a madman inside the 5. So this offense, I think it has a chance to put up honestly one of its best games of the season against this Bengals defense. Because the Bengals, they have given up lots of points at times. 41 against the Chargers, 41 against the Browns, 34 to the Jets. So I think there is a possibility that this offense has an elite level of performance this week for the Chiefs. I really do. This game as a whole is going to be a great game. The Chiefs, they get a whole bunch of guys back from COVID. The Bengals get some guys back from COVID. This game as a whole is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Game of the year caliber, definitely game of the week in my eyes. I'm excited to watch it. And as a side, I hope the Chiefs win, and I hope the Dolphins win. But that is my preview of the Chiefs and the Bengals. Give me your thoughts down below of what you think of this game, and I will see you in the next one.